are Godzilla movies bad? That seems to be the underlying thesis and underlying assumption of a couple of different video essays that surfaced in the last month or so, as people see that Godzilla Minus One is making headlines, and they go see Godzilla Minus One, and suddenly decide that they're experts on Godzilla movies and kaiju movies and so on, and want to chase that clout and chase those clicks and make terrible video essays, which basically boil down to Godzilla Minus One is really good, and the original Godzilla is really good, and everything else is terrible. And I said in my community postings that I wasn't going to do a response when there was only one of them, but they keep coming out, and more keep coming out. And they all seem to, I mean, first of all, they're all terrible. They all make terrible arguments. But they all have at their base this idea that Godzilla movies are sort of universally understood to be bad movies. Maybe so bad they're good, but nevertheless, they're bad movies. And that Godzilla Minus One is just this blast out of nowhere of a good Godzilla movie, an objectively good Godzilla movie. And that assumption comes out of in a place of cinematic snobbery, really, and I can understand it because I have been there. I have gone through that whole process myself. When I was a kid, I grew up with Godzilla. I didn't see all the Godzilla movies as a kid, but I certainly rented any of them that were available at the local video rental store when those were things. And where is he? He's down here. This is my Imperial Godzilla from when I was a kid. This is the one that I bought back in the 80s. So I rented the videos. I actually owned a copy of Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. And I love them. I grew up with Godzilla. But then, when I became a late teenager, young adult, and I got all goth, and became a cinematic snob, and I said, oh, only the original Gojira is a objectively good film, speaking to the gothic horror and the meaningful, profound movies. And the Showa era stuff that I grew up with, whatever. But as what happens usually when you keep growing and you become an actual adult and not just somebody who wants to be an adult. When you become an actual adult, then you rediscover those things of your youth, right? So, your average kid loves Disney and then falls out of Disney as a teenager, and then maybe, I mean, we'll see, but he gets back into Disney again as an adult. I love Disney actually more as an adult than I ever did as a kid. And same thing happened with the Showa Godzilla movies, is that I fell out of it as a young adult because I only wanted the true Gojira, not that B movie stuff. And then I rediscovered the B movie stuff and fell in love with it all over again. And so I've been through that cycle, so I can see where these video essayists are stuck in that young adult part, where, oh yes, only if they ever liked Godzilla movies to begin with, if they ever even grew up with the classic Godzilla movies. But if you're not familiar with kaiju films, Godzilla movies, and Japanese cinema, and so on, I can see where you might jump to the conclusion that they're bad movies. If you're not familiar with the art form, if you're not familiar with Japanese tokusatsu, if you're not even familiar with like mid-century science fiction, you might just dismiss it all as cheesy effects and sort of stilted dialogue and not exactly, cinematic cinematography and so on, as common to the genre. And that doesn't make a movie bad, though. Right, just certain lapses of formal characteristics or a different set of sort of movie making tropes and assumptions at the time doesn't make it a bad movie today. I've posted it before, especially when talking about Plan 9 from Outer Space and why it's an almost good movie. It's almost great movie. There's sort of a, people tend to think of it as like, oh, it's a good movie or a bad movie. It's not quite that simple. Right? There is I like to use a four-quadrant model. So on one axis, you have, is it objectively good or objectively bad? As in an assessment of its objective formal characteristics. So how's its cinematography? How's its dialogue? How's its plotting, its script, its effects, all those technical things that go into making a good movie, or if they don't have it, a bad movie. And then there's whether you like it or not. Because you can have an objectively good movie that you don't like. You can have an objectively bad movie that you do like. You can have, ideally, an objectively good movie that you also like, and also an objectively bad movie that you don't. Completely inexorable films. And that's where you get the so bad it's good things. It's like a bad movie that I like. Still enjoy it for whatever reason. But even then, it's not quite that simple because a film that might be bad in some respects might be good in other respects. And that's where the classic Godzilla movies sit. Is that they have things going on that you wouldn't know just if you assessed it by its reputation, or you just took one look at the silly monster costumes and didn't bother to sit with it and study it and analyze it and try to understand the movie. Now, that's clearly what happened with these guys. And it shows because even though their theses, their central theses, might not necessarily be wrong, they still defended them very poorly. It's a very dismissive attitude towards the cheesy, the bad, the B Godzilla movies, not like the art pieces of art, the art form of the original Gojira and Shin Gojira and Godzilla Minus One. Really ought to have sat with it for a while to better understand these things. And one of these essays, the first one that I said I wasn't going to bother even doing a reply to because so many other kaiju fans have done a reply to it, had as part of its central thesis that America specifically can't do good Godzilla movies. It's not even that it's just the simple dichotomy of there's the good ones and the bad ones. It's that America specifically can't do Godzilla movies. All of the arguments were dumb, but the fundamental thesis actually is not entirely wrong. It's sort of been well known for a while, and I would still maintain it's true, that America does not do great Godzilla movies because the United States doesn't have the feeling for Godzilla. Of course, the original Gojira, 1954, was a reaction to the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as the Lucky Dragon number 5 incident, where a Japanese fishing boat got caught in the fallout from the nuclear test of Bikini Atoll. And general sort of wartime and post-war trauma. And America's never experienced that, right? They were the ones who did it. They weren't the ones who were the victims of this atomic horror. So American Godzilla movies don't have the feeling for it. Even Godzilla at his silliest still carried that with him. That trauma of nuclear, experiencing being victimized by nuclear power. Godzilla still carried that with him. Even in his silliest moments, even his most heroic moments, that is still there. Americans never experienced that. So, their attempts at Godzilla tend to come off more hollow and more preachy, and in fact, I have insisted that really American Godzilla movies are remakes of The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which was itself an inspiration for the original Gojira, but a much more thematically hollow experience because it's just a preachy nuclear parable by the country that dropped the bomb, not the country that had the bomb dropped on it. So, in comparison, Gojira is a much more profound and somber film because it's by the victims of it. America hasn't experienced that, so its Godzilla tends to be, it's the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. It's much more abstracted, it's much more distanced from that experience. And as a consequence, then, not that we have a whole lot of American Godzillas to choose from, we got some dumb comic books where Godzilla kills God. Maybe someday I'll do a video on the theological stupidity of that. But the 98 and the Monsterverse, yeah, they are kind of big, dumb monster movies. And actually, one of these video essays about Godzilla, had the audacity to claim that the only good MonsterVerse movie is the 2014 Godzilla, which is like, you can dismiss the Showa movies, whatever, but to claim that's fighting words right there. Meanwhile, over in Japan, you have this current era, especially of these, somber, meditative, profound, meaningful foreign art films. The current Reiwa era of Godzilla are essentially art house Godzilla. You have Shin Gojira, which is this black satire on the Japanese government, done by the guy who did Neon Genesis Evangelion. You have the anime trilogy, which is a very philosophically rich and nuanced story, despite the flaws of the anime itself. You have Singular Point, which is a very different take on Godzilla, and now you have Godzilla Minus One, which is again another meditation on post-war trauma, and a ripping good movie. Like it's so good that it captured the world's attention in a way that few Godzilla movies have, like, since the original. And so you have these two poles of Godzilla, and it's just like catnip to these people that, of course, they're going to prefer the deep, meaningful, autistic foreign art films over the empty American Hollywood schlock. The thing is, you can like both. I mean, I personally don't like the MonsterVerse, but you can like both. That's okay, and that's the process that I went through as well. I still tend to prefer the more deep and meaningful Godzilla movies. Godzilla as metaphor for thing. But I can appreciate the fun ones as well. This is my Godzilla toy when I was a kid, but right behind me over here I have my Showa Godzilla diorama, shelf diorama, which I'm doing a video about. I'll show you how I did it. So it's not an either or, and as I got older, I rediscovered these Showa films, and got past the reputation that these are just empty, dumb action movies of guys in bad costumes. That these movies have things to say, despite, and occasionally even because of, their technical limitations. Yes, they are people in sometimes quite bad costumes. Okay, granted. Some of the technical aspects are not exactly brilliant studies in cinematography. But they do have their ideas going on that are deeper than just King Kong and Godzilla slugging it out. King Kong versus Godzilla specifically is a story about post-war Japanese media and Japanese business and commerce, and how these rapid post-war changes to Japan, introducing concepts of mass media and the pharmaceutical industry specifically. Television is affecting Japanese culture. Even I pointed this out in my video on Japanese King Kong, but the castle that they destroy at the end of King Kong versus Godzilla is not even an authentic Japanese castle. It was a tourist attraction that was built in the 50s. So, like, is that even itself a commentary on sort of the effects of the post-war economy on Japan? King Kong or Mothra versus Godzilla. I mean, Mothra itself is an extremely interesting story of this kami as a kaiju, that is basically, it's a representative of nature. She's a kami of life, death, and rebirth, of the forces of nature, and she is benevolent when you have a positive relationship with her, and she is malevolent when you don't. And then in Mothra versus King Kong, or Mothra versus Godzilla, Mothra versus King Kong would be a great movie, but Mothra versus Godzilla, you have this symbol of nature and natural cycles of life, death, and rebirth against this atomic abomination made of human technology and human violence, who are now fighting each other, instigated by sort of capital and consumerism run amok. Specifically a theme park. So this like almost trivial example of industry spurs on this conflict between nature and humankind, and human violence towards nature and towards each other as well. That's in there. Um, and keep going. I could keep going. Atragon is a story about sort of reconciling with the past, Japan's imperialistic past, and how to move forward uh, from that into a more globalized age in the post-war political environment. Uh, could just keep going. These things are there despite the technical limitations of Godzilla movies, but you do have to sit with them. You can't just watch it, see bad costume, and decide they're bad movies. Granted, not all of them are great art either. you know, Godzilla versus Megalon is great monsters, terrible movie. Um, my favorite Godzilla, specifically Godzilla movies of the Showa era, after the original, are Invasion of Astro Monster and Destroy All Monsters, which may not be the headiest movies in the entire canon, but they're a whole lot of fun. It's okay for a movie to be fun, too. Just being fun doesn't make it bad, either. Um, but for most of these things, if you actually sit with them and study them, like don't just passively like watch it, okay, whatever, but actually like sit with them and try and understand them and what it is that they're telling you, there's much greater depth in there than they are given credit for in their reputations or by YouTube video essayists. And it carries on. The after the Showa era came to an end, you had the Heisei era, which was a concerted attempt at building a Godzilla continuity across several films that dealt with all sorts of different themes of technology and sort of human destiny and genetics and all sorts of things. Um, the Millennium era is a mixed bag of things, but again, you have a movie like Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, giant monsters all out of attack, which is also a movie about reconciling with the war and Japan's role in the war. Usually it's Japan as victim, but that's also reconciling with Japan as an antagonist in the war. Um, but otherwise, there's Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, which is one of my favorite of the Millennium era because it's a big anime. It's an live action anime. Or Final Wars, which is a remake of Destroy All Monsters, as though it was Power Rangers meets The Matrix. But again, it's just fun, and it's okay. It's okay for there to be a certain cheesiness to them. It doesn't make them bad. And yeah, they might have technical limitations. They might not be super high up on the objectively good scale as far as assessing their formal characteristics. But I think it's also unfair to say that they are bad movies. Um, they have a lot of depth to them that you will come to know if you actually give them a chance and you actually watch them and sit with them and think about them and especially study them in the context of the time, in the context of Japanese culture, in the post-war milieu, and in the genre of mid-century science fiction in general. So I would ask these video essayists doing these things to give them another look. Don't just assume that you know everything because you saw -1 and you're familiar with the reputation, or you just decide to mainline all these movies in a week and you didn't actually sit with them and try and understand them. Give them another go, give them another look, watch them again, and actually stop and do it slowly and think about it this time. And you'll see that they're actually not as bad as you think they are.